Hello, chess kids. It's Mike Amore from the WCA. I want to show you the game of the week taken from a young man named Charlie, whose screen name is Dark Vegetable. Isn't that a beauty? I don't know where they come up with these names. But anyway, he's playing black against somebody named Stonewall Jack. So I thought he would begin with a Stonewall, which is a queen pawn opening, but Stonewall Jack didn't. He began with the move e4, e5, knight f3, and Charlie played knight c6, defending his pawn. So where do these games come from? If you signed up for chesskid.com through the WCA, we get to look at your games, which is something we like to do. And, you know, every now and then we pull one out that's really instructive and exciting. This was fantastic, this game. Really well played. It continues as a Ruy Lopez or a Spanish game. You're going to hear both of those descriptions for this opening. And the bishop on b5, I know you guys are used to seeing it here on c4, but you know, this is a grandmaster opening. It is a minor piece developed to a beautiful square attacking a knight, pawn to a6. And in this position, the pawn move got his opponent to take the knight. Now, he doesn't have to. He could just retreat the bishop, but he decided to give up his bishop for the knight, which is much better than having it captured for nothing. And now black has a problem as to which pawn to take back with. Taking towards the center with a pawn is usually a good idea. So in this case, it would be a b pawn turning into a c pawn. However, in the opening, it works out better most of the time if you take away from the center. Now, why did I say away? Because the d pawn became a c pawn, which is technically further away from the center. Now, what are the advantages of doing that? It opens up the bishop and opens up the queen, because white sometimes tries to play the following trick. Because they just took away your knight, they think sometimes they can get away with, well, taking the pawn. And now you'll see one of the reasons you take with this d pawn, because you open the path for the queen, and she just simply comes to d4, and you're going to get something back because that queen is attacking the knight and the pawn. They're both not protected, and it turns out you can't protect both. So a lot of times players, when they realize queen d4 works, they'll just retreat the knight, and here black can get his pawn back with queen takes pawn check. And I've seen kids block the check with a queen, and you kind of go into this endgame, which still has a lot of play in it. I mean, you know, I wouldn't call this game a draw by any chance. I mean, you know, trade the queens, and after the king takes, you still have an interesting battle. White can't castle, but they can kind of castle by hand, I think. As you can see, this rook up here is going to be able to slide underneath the king at some point. And black, I don't know, they may castle on this side of the board because they have an extra pawn, which is something that happened in the game with Charlie, as you'll see. So this position could have happened, but please pay attention to back here after Charlie attacked the bishop. When they take your knight, just remember to take back with the d pawn, just in case they try to snatch that pawn. You just have to remember the move queen d4, and you'll get everything back, okay? So it seems Charlie's opponent knew that trick and did not take the pawn. Instead, he played one of the common moves, just castle the king. And this position is kind of a cool one because a couple of things have changed, my friends. One, do you notice that white had to give up one of their bishops to get this position? Because they sort of chopped up black's pawns on this side of the board, and I do hope you can see my mouse toggling around. Their pawns have been chopped up a little bit, and that's not always so bad because black does have two nice bishops to play with in the middle game, and a lot of this is what took place in the 4 o'clock video. So if you really are ambitious, you can go watch that video today. So by castling, he gives black a problem and says, well, you know, at some point, are you going to defend this pawn here? And Charlie defends it by pinning the knight. And Charlie knows a little trick in this position. A lot of players play h3, attacking the bishop. And Charlie just said, you know what? I'm not moving my bishop. And he kind of sets a little bit of a trap. The trap is basically, if white decides to take the bishop, you take back with the pawn. Now, you gave up a piece, but there's a problem here for white. Not only is the knight being attacked, but the knight is kind of short squares as to where he can run. I have seen games where the knight would run to h2 to attack this pawn here on g4, but can you spot black's really powerful move? Pause your videos if you need to. Queen h4. Queen takes knight is checkmate, and if you move the knight, the queen will slide all the way to the top and checkmate you there. So there's not a whole lot that white can do. If they try to make an escape square, you could get hit with several things. One really strong move is this bishop check, and one game that I saw on chesskid.com ended like this. White tried to stop the check with a pawn and didn't realize that, well, black's just going to take it anyway. So if you want to take this bishop with your queen, by all means, go ahead. You're just going to lose your queen. So that's really bad. The other alternative, if you block with your rook, then you're going to get mated this really cool way. Queen takes f2 check. The king goes to h1, and now it's simply mate in 2. Can you find a way to do that? I hope you found that beautiful rook sacrifice. Give up the rook for the knight. King has to take, and now you have mate in 1. Don't miss it. Excellent. Checkmate. Game is finished, I tell you. So because of that trap, Charlie's opponent, to his credit, did not take the bishop right away and played a really good move. They played d3, and once this dark squared bishop is open for white, it then becomes possible for white to take the bishop, but it still is very scary to do. So at this point, Charlie admitted he didn't know much more and wasn't sure if he was supposed to retreat his bishop or not. So he left it there. I guess, you know, in case white takes, he'll get the play that I showed you. It might not be quite the same, but he developed his bishop to protect his e-pawn, and he said, okay, let me see what happens. White played bishop to e3, and again, they could maybe steal this bishop here by taking it, because they'll have this square, the g5 square, for their knight. Can you guys see why? That would keep the queen out for a while because you have that square protected. But he wasn't really interested, or I guess maybe white didn't see it. A lot of times kids learn not to take that bishop, that it's a trap. But even as the position changes, sometimes you can break that rule and get away with it. So Charlie moved his queen to e7. His main idea is to keep an eye on this diagonal, but more importantly, he wants to swing his king over here in castle. White continues to develop. Charlie castled, and it's funny, I don't know, it's getting close where white can take that bishop, but white's like, no way, I don't want it, and played queen to c1. He's kind of creating a battery here, even though there's a knight in the way. And at this point, Charlie got scared a little bit and said that he thought the bishop was going to get taken at any moment, so he retreated it. But he was kind of happy with the way the opening worked out. If you look at his king here, it's surrounded by, I don't know, like 100 pieces. He looks really safe, and by retreating the bishop, he wants to start a pawn storm. Now, if this was a regular Chess Kid video, you would start seeing like pawns falling out of the sky, but I don't have that option here, so you're just going to have to use your imagination. So he played bishop to d7, and I love white's next move. White says, okay, you want to pawn storm me? Well, take that. And he played a4. His plan is to play b4, b5, open up these lines and start getting to Charlie's king. And Charlie, to his credit, kind of knows the rule of opposite side castling. He strikes on the other wing. Knight to c4, bringing a piece closer to Charlie's king, and then f4, chasing the bishop back to d2, and then bringing his last piece into the game. Do you notice how knight f6 connects the two black rooks? That's really good. Black develops finally, and then white says, okay, here comes the pawn storm. All right, love Charlie's next move. He played g5. And basically with g5, he's offering white a free pawn. As far as I know, nothing is protecting this pawn here on g5. So why would he give it away for free? Well, if you take it, it's going to look something like this. And I think Charlie's idea was to put a rook underneath that knight. I really like this game. He really showed a lot of courage and an understanding of which side of the board he should be playing on. This is like an all-out attack. Maybe, just maybe, white can defend his knight with that move. If he goes away, then Charlie's going to play something like bishop takes h3, because you have this gorgeous pin on this line, and this is not looking too good for white. So can you guys understand from here why he's offering the G pawn for free? All he wants to do is open the G file, and he figures he's got to get enough for that. Okay, so white doesn't go for the bait. Instead, he trades in the center, and Charlie has a chance of taking with the queen or with the pawn. He chose the pawn. I think his reasoning was he wanted to keep the queen free on this line, and he kind of undoubled his c pawns, but white kept coming, b5. And Charlie now has to make a very important decision. Does he deal with white's pawn storming up the board, or does he continue with his own storm? My advice to you, chess kids, keep pushing on your side until you absolutely have to give in on the other side. So he did. He played g4. I really like this game. Pawn takes on a6, getting really close to becoming a queen or opening up the white king. Charlie takes the knight, and now he has to deal with the pawn on a7, because one more step and Big Mama's on the board. So how do you deal with that? Could you stop your video and figure out how he stopped the pawn? Well, he played king c7 so that his rook here could swing over and stop the pawn. White brought the queen into the game, and I like Charlie's move. He played pawn to b6, setting a little bit of a trap, and white fell right into it. White continued the pawn storm, the second a pawn. See, there's two of these guys here, hoping that Charlie will just take and then all the black pieces just flood in. But Charlie found a really cool defensive move, b5, blocking the queen out. Well, pawn a6, and now another blocking move, rook a8, attacking the most advanced pawn. And I really like the way he played this game, because he could continue his attack on the other side of the board, and most players would, but I like the fact that he stopped all of white's threats before he continued. Queen a3, threatening a check on a5 and trying to sneak in with the queen. He backs it up, knowing the queen would be coming in, and she did. Queen a5, and because Charlie's up a piece and still has a lot of pressure against the white king, he decides, let's see if I can get the queens off the board. And queen d8 is a real sneaky move, because if white trades, then Charlie goes into the endgame up a piece, or maybe even continues to attack the white king without the queens. And don't forget, these pawns here have been stopped cold. So how to continue? Well, white says, I don't want to trade, but white missed that Charlie's move had a second reason besides offering a queen trade. Big Mama swung over and threatened checkmate up on g2. And in this position, black was the winner because white resigns here. There's really not a good way to deal with the queen's pressure at the top of the board. I guess white could try to move the pawn in front of the king to stop the mate, maybe a move like g3. But whenever you have to move pawns in front of your king and there are enemy pawns waiting outside the door, you're probably in for bad news. So, you know, pawn takes here, just opening up the game, and you have some serious problems. You know, you might try a move like d4 so the queen could help out this way, but you're going to get mated. There's actually a forced mate here. Can you guys find it? Pawn takes pawn is double check. So you're in check with the pawn and the queen, which means you have to move. I guess your best is to take the pawn with the king, but it's made in two. Can you find it? Check. And I don't know, where does he go? Up or down? I guess you can choose. If he goes down, mate in one. It would have worked the other way too. Checkmate. All right, Just Kids.